I keep forgetting to tell you this ahead of time, but it takes about 10 seconds to go live on LinkedIn. So if you're on YouTube, hi. If you're on LinkedIn, probably
Hey
haven't seen
everyone.
this yet.
As always, LinkedIn is just a little bit behind everybody else.
Yeah, LinkedIn is behind. So if you're on LinkedIn, you're probably now in here. So welcome back to another live. I'm your host, Joseph Lewin, and I'm super excited today to have Chris Marr, the authority coach. And when I reached out to Chris, I didn't realize that he's also been working with Marcus Sheridan for quite a while now, who I also really love and his stuff and respect. And I've learned a lot from They Ask You Answer and following Marcus on everything he's up to. So, Chris, super excited to have you on to talk about how people can interact with clients better, maybe give them a little bit of pushback and not just take orders and make more
Yeah,
money
yeah,
at the end of the day. So super excited
yeah,
to
absolutely.
dive in.
Let's get into it. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. And if I've had a lot of episodes of my podcast now, a couple hundred, and I don't think I've ever had a Scott
Wow.
on my
Well,
show. So
great. Well, I'm glad to be the first. This might be the first of many. You never know.
yeah, I love it. I
There's
love
not
it.
many of us really. There's a small island, So that's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah, just I love your accent. So I had to say it. But anyway, let's dive in. So you're really focused on helping people build authority, and you work with account managers and coaches. But something that was really interesting in your book that you sent me, and I'll just pull this up now, was you talk about um, being a coach versus a consultant and kind of that
Mm,
mindset that you need
yeah.
to make that switch. And it seems like that really is going to help us set the tone for the conversation of like, what's the difference between coming in, whether you're an account manager or you're running a business, what's the difference between being a coach and being a consultant?
Yeah, so this is good. It's like a seesaw, right? You want to feel like you're either on one or the other, right? You're either consulting and you're saying, here's exactly what you need to do, because I'm the expert and I've heard enough of what I need to hear, and just go do this thing and you're going to be successful. Or you're tipping it much more towards the coach side and you're saying, so, how do you feel like what would be the best way to tackle it? Or why has this become a problem now? Or why is it, so you're using more of a what we call a question first approach
Mm,
to sort of encourage self-discovery. And of course, when you use question first, and people discover stuff for themselves, is far more empowering and far more motivating than they want to go fix that thing. So oftentimes
absolutely.
it's about knowing which tool is important, is like useful. I think when I wrote it in the book, I think my opinion has probably changed a little. I think the seesaw analogy helps a lot. It's like which one, right? Not in the middle. It's either you're saying you've uncovered a problem and you know exactly how to fix it and you can get the client there quickly. Um, Alternatively, they might be making a massive error or a mistake, and
Mm,
you're not going to spend time asking questions about it. You're just going to say, hey, look, I need to stop you there. What you're about to do, what I'm worried about is, what we don't want to have happen is, let's talk about that. And then you switch back to coach mode, right? And you're asking much more questions at this point. So I think it's just knowing, Joseph, like which approach is the right approach for the moment that we're in. And the way to discover that is, I think I've explained with consulting, usually a consultant is hired to solve a problem. Hey, we have this problem, go solve it. Here's a solution. Here's what you need to do. Go do that. Thank you very much. The coach is more about like that indispensable relationship of like helping the client to work through problems. So we use a question first approach when the goal isn't clear, or the
mm,
problem isn't clear, or when there's resistance or pushback to certain ideas, for example, or we use a question first approach or a coach approach when we need people to buy into ideas. Like They
yeah.
Ask You Answer, we started off talking about, right? A lot of people conceptually love it, but they don't realize how much work's involved. And so we
Mm,
start to get into it and they're like, oh, I don't know if I really want to write a pricing article and put that on my website. And so the consultant would be like, but that's part of the plan. Like we put pricing, and the client's like, no, I don't want to do it. The coach
right.
should be something like, well, tell me a little bit about why you feel like it would not work for your company. And of course, what we're doing is we want them to see for themselves it's actually a great idea. It's not my idea. I want it to be your idea. And that's what I think what the coach can be really great at, is making it feel like it was your idea all along. And therefore you're going to do it, you're going to commit to it, you're motivated to actually achieve or complete the project or whatever the work is that needs done.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point of view. And when you're getting into that yeah, I like that differentiation between consulting and coaching, because another piece of that is when you're in that consulting when you put your consulting hat on, you're trying to
Mhm.
solve problems for people. And it's kind of
Yep.
interesting because um, I would say that the default for me for a long time, the default with a lot of people that I've run into, I think it's just kind of the in a lot of ways the default way that we think is like people want us to come in and just solve their problem.
Mm.
But ultimately,
Well,
there's something deeper. There's pain that that person has in their life. There's
yeah.
something going on. And so when you get into that, like when you get into the consulting zone, you tend to just put solutions out there,
Yep.
but without really understanding the underlying reason why. For one,
Yep.
you might be giving them totally the wrong reason, but I think the buy-in piece is huge because I've seen this having been in sales roles,
Mm.
in
Of course.
individual coaching, consulting roles where it's my business, and then being in delivery where I'm basically borderline account manager. You
Sure.
could call it an account manager in that role, but I'm overseeing the delivery for clients in the agency world. What ends up happening when you are only have the consulting hat on is you might get somebody to say yes, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that they're actually going to follow through and do the work it takes to get it done. Whereas when you
So
ask the question,
it is
consult
about
like,
totally about commitment, right? Let me share a couple of things I think are important here. Just exactly what you're speaking about, which I think is so important, right? So consultant, if you know the problem, you know how to fix it, I can get you there fast, right? I think speed is important. There's times where I've been working with clients and they have let their clients take too long to make a decision. And they look back and go, I think I could have got you there a lot faster.
yeah,
And you're like, right, okay, so speed matters. So you think to yourself, right, I've been here before. I've seen a client struggle with this before many, many times. I do know exactly what to do. Do I want to wait until they're ready? Or do I just tell them what they need to do? And then we talk about how you're going to get it done, right? It's like speed, let's go. So sometimes
yep,
it is a case of saying, hey, look, I've heard enough. I think I know this is what we need to do. We need to do this, this, and this. Do you agree? Are we on the same page? Right. Let's talk about how we're going to get it done, what might get in the way of you getting it done, when you want to get it done by, how I can support you, what other support you need to get it done, and let's make a game plan and get this decision made, right? That's you doing speed through expert knowledge and you know what to do, right? I think that's great. But as you said, the danger here is that you don't do that last bit, which is the coaching piece, right? And get that agreement. You just make assumptions, right? So the other part of that spectrum, if you go from assumptions to questions. So are we are we even looking at the problem, right? Or is what you're saying a symptom of a problem? And how do we get that buy-in? So there's a method that we use here. It's called the I3 method. Okay, I3, which stands for issue, impact, importance. Issue, impact, and importance. If we want to raise the stakes and we want people to feel intrinsically motivated and bought into solving a problem or taking advantage of an opportunity or figuring, even just like figuring something out, we have to first of all establish what's the issue. In other words,
yeah,
what is the problem that we're trying to like work on here, and why is that a problem? How long has it been a problem for? What have you tried to do to fix it in the past? Right? What worked? What didn't? Great. What kind of negative impact is that having on the business right now? How's that affecting you, your team, your ability to collect revenue, whatever the problem might be? Kind of
yep,
negative impact is it having? And then we switch to, I want you to imagine that this problem is fixed. Okay, we're no longer having this problem anymore. What kind of impact is that having on the business now? And then the last thing is, which is often missed. In fact, as we go through this I3 model, Joseph, people do it, they go from try to figure out the problem and then maybe a little bit of impact and then they do zero importance. And then the
mm,
last thing is looking at all the priorities that you have on your plate right now, Joseph. Where does this stack up in terms of priority? Would you say it's a high priority, a medium priority, or a low priority? And of course, because we've had this quite in-depth conversation, they're probably going to say, it feels really important to me that we fix this. And then it's like, well, let's talk about exactly what we're going to do together. So I3, issue, impact, importance, really makes it feel like it gets that buy-in in the person, and it raises the stakes, and it stretches a gap between where they are and where they want to be, and it kind of makes a mountain out of a molehill. And so they realize that not only is this important, and but they want to do something about it. They're bought into it, and also they need your help to get there. And so we use this methodology across sales, account management, leadership, whatever, to help people buy in to the work that's required to get there. And of course, people aren't going to do the work if there's no goal, right? If we don't know where
Yep.
we're going or why we're going there, why would we do the work? And so this really helps people see the path, and it helps them to see essentially that they're building a bridge between where they are and where they want to be. I find it to be quite a powerful way to help build buy-in and empower others to want to do the work that's required.
Yeah, it's interesting because with that issue, impact, importance, it's really,
Correct.
is that right? Did I get that
That's
right?
right. Issue,
Yeah,
impact,
so
importance. Yep.
what I like about that is that, first of all, what ends up happening, well, let's just use the agency world as an example. If we're talking about
Sure.
account managers in an agency space, or you're a consultant, you're a coach, but you're kind of in that agency world, you're doing some kind of services for clients. It's really easy to do whatever the client's asking you to do,
Right.
but a lot of times clients have no idea what they're talking about. I mean, clients all the time are going to ask you to solve the wrong problem, right? And so by digging
Yep.
in and asking questions, you're not immediately going, "Hey, you're wrong. I'm right. I'm the consultant. You're paying me to be here. Here's what you should do instead." Like, sometimes that works. Maybe, you know, at the right time
Yeah.
you need to do that, but a lot of times it's
Sure.
better to take a step back and really ask the right questions to
Well,
figure out, are we solving the right problem? Because if we
correct.
solve the wrong problem, and then we go to the next stage, right? Okay,
Yeah.
we've identified this is the pain or the problem you're trying to solve. Now here's the impact that solving that problem is going to have. If we solve it, here's going to be the outcome of it. And then,
Vision.
okay, how important is that? And then what you're going to find out by going through that process is, okay, we figured out the right problem. We know what it's going to do if we solve it, and then deciding, is that actually worth the effort? And if
Right.
you do that
Which
up
might be
front,
no.
yeah, if you do that
Yeah.
up front, then you're not wasting a ton of time and energy working on something that's
You got it, man.
gonna fail.
Yeah, 100%. You've nailed it there. So let's take an agency example. A client comes to you with a request, right? It could be completely off the cuff, just a whim, but the order taker goes, "Yeah, sounds great. Let's get that done." And then they do the thing, and then the client goes, "I was expecting something else entirely," right? And the expectations are way off. It's mismanaged, and not only that, we got really busy with this client. We ended up doing more than we should have, which obviously erodes our profits. And because we were stretched so thin, we ended up missing deadlines on other client projects. Yada
Yep.
yada yada. It's like this vicious cycle. The account managers, like you've got to manage that scope, right? You've got to make sure.
Yep.
So this is all about this transition or this transformation that we're trying to make from people pleaser to peer, or order taker to authority, right? So when a client comes in with a request, we don't just go, "Yes, sir, no problem, sir, we'll do that, sir," and then you just do it. You say, "Tell me a little bit more about that. What led to this decision? What's changed?" Okay,
Mm.
we could do it, but based on everything else that we've got going on right now, we would have to stop doing something else in order to do this, right? So we are challenging the client. Basically, the way I look at it is, we have to force clarity, right, through all these things that we've talked about already. Is how do we get more clarity?
Yep.
And we have to expedite decisions, right? In other words, we need to get a yes or a no on this now. So we're going to work together until we've made a decision on where this fits in with the project, and if it's a priority or not, and what's going to happen next. So we don't just let things happen. Everything has to happen deliberately for a reason. And
Yep.
so that's up to us. As to the account manager really is the heart of the agency. If they're saying yes to stuff, everybody else is going to be impacted by that, and the agency is going to be impacted by that. The profit margins are going to be eroded because of that. And so we've got a really important job to do with our clients. And we're not pushing back on our clients because we're assholes, right? We're not
Right.
doing it to be contentious. We're like, let's just slow down here for a second and just make sure that we're asking for the right things. Expectations are managed. We're on the same page, and we know what the issue is. We know what impact it's going to make, and we know how important it is. That's all we're saying here. And I think it's the right thing to do, because I think one of the assumptions that you can make about your clients, I like to make it because it makes me a better person, which is they're disorganized, they don't really know what they want. And by coming into my world, I force them to be more clear, more organized, and better because of it. But oftentimes what happens is the client ends up dragging us into their world where it's
Yep.
chaotic and disorganized. And
100%.
I like to think that, look, I'm inviting you to come and work with me where life is better, where we're going to
Mhm.
do our best work together. But in order to do our best work, there's boundaries, there's rules, there's conditions. And I think that it's up to us as client-facing professionals to set those conditions for success. I think it's a big part of our job.
Yeah. So let's role play this a little bit, right? Because I think
All
that
right.
you're honing in on something that's really important, and I think it's a huge challenge that account managers face. Or you're a little bit newer in business, you're doing some kind of consulting or coaching work, you're going to run into the same thing. Like you're
Right.
independent, you're doing your own thing, you're going to run into the same thing where a client asks you to do something that's out of scope and is unreasonable. And a lot of times, I mean, almost always, when you do something outside of scope without really reevaluating if it's the right thing to do,
Yep.
they're not gonna be happy. They're gonna be less happy when you do the extra work than they were, if you would have just said, "No, we're gonna do what we said we were gonna do," and they're gonna be
Mhm.
frustrated at the moment. So, how do we figure out that happy balance? So let's say,
Yeah, sure.
you're the account manager and you're working with me on producing um, podcast videos, right? And that's
Mhm.
what you guys do. And then I'm coming in and I go, hey, I'd like you to publish these videos on YouTube also, because we're getting ready to launch on YouTube. And so I know you guys are publishing these on the podcast
Sure.
platforms, but let's go ahead and next week let's get those published out on the podcast platforms. Okay.
Yeah. All right, Joseph. It sounds like could potentially be a great idea. I want to come back to something that we talked about at the very start of our relationship, which is when we want to do something new, we slow down to think about it, make sure we've actually got a plan. Okay. So, what has led to this decision to jump onto YouTube? Tell me a little bit more about what you hope to achieve there.
Well, I was watching an Alex Hermosi video and he's talking about creating content and putting it out there all the time. So, we
Good.
got to be on all the platforms. We're right now we're just on Spotify, maybe posting a little bit
Hmm.
on LinkedIn. So
Yeah.
we've got to be on YouTube. It's just we absolutely have to.
Do you think it'd be good for us though to take the time right now, Joseph, to make sure that you're doing the right thing for you and that you have some goals that you want to achieve with YouTube? Do you think that'd be a smart play for us right now? Before we dive in.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking.
Well, what do you think success looks like for you? If we go onto YouTube and we start publishing your videos on YouTube, what would you like to see happen? What kind of difference is that going to make for us?
Well, I'm not sure. It's really
Yeah.
more just I don't know. You're the expert here, not me. So, you know,
Well,
how should we think about that?
right. Okay. So maybe that's a better question, right? So what should we be thinking about here? So what we don't want to have happen here, Joseph, is we try to be everywhere. And what happens is we end up spreading ourselves thin and we actually don't really achieve success because we're trying to do everything instead of really focus on the things that could really move the needle for us. So I think it might be useful for us to come back to why did you start a podcast in the first place, right? What did you want to achieve with the podcast?
Yeah, no, I love it. I won't put you on the spot anymore. I know I
So
just like totally put you on the spot, but
yeah,
I like working through that.
what feels like it was useful there, do you think, when you think about the audience right now? What might be useful to pick apart there?
Yeah, I think what ends up happening in that scenario is, the person just continues to push and push and push. But what I liked about that is you're not saying you're not putting up a barrier, right? You're kind of like you said earlier, you're inviting them in, and then you're helping make uh in a sense your problem that you're going to have in implementing that, you're kind of inviting them into that problem. So
Yeah,
in other words, like, hey, we're focusing our attention over here, it's going to pull away from something else that we're doing. And you said that in a
yeah,
way that it wasn't that blunt, but you basically got across the point like, hey, this is going to water down what we're doing. And then I liked at the very end how you pulled it back to, okay, let's readdress. And I know I totally put you on the spot, so
mhm, it's all
well
good.
done. But when at the end you're saying, hey, let's get back to the goals of why did you start a podcast, right?
Right.
And then you're forcing me to come back to the main goal and the main
Yeah.
priority. And then, obviously we didn't talk about it before, so we can't really reference whatever that would
Yeah,
be.
the thing is the
But
client could be right. We might work through it and go, actually, it sounds like a really great idea, but we do need to be clear. So there's lots of ways it could go. I could be completely wrong. They could be right. I've got to be prepared for that, right? There's a couple of things I probably would have done better here as well, in terms of like what we call a vanguard, which is disarming the client. So what we don't want to have happen is it become a debate or a fight. But what I want to do is still move the conversation towards something, right? I want to have momentum in the conversation. So we don't want to debate. We don't want it to be like my opinion versus yours. We
Yep.
do want to move the conversation towards something. And so we want it to be a safe place for you to come and actually talk about your ideas, right? I'm glad you're sharing this idea with me. I think it could potentially have legs. Let's explore it together. How does that sound? Before we dive in, would it be useful for us to explore what it could look like, just in case, right? Because what we don't want to have happen, and that's a key phrase to use, by the way,
Yeah,
is
I like that.
what we don't want to have happen is, or what my experience has shown me, or what I've learned through my experience with my clients in the past is, if we try to do everything, we end up being very poor at all of it instead of
Yep.
being very good at something specific. I'm not saying that's exactly what's going to happen here, but that would be my number one concern.
Yeah, and
So,
I love how you
yep,
keep pulling people back to hey, what did we set out to do this with originally? And then
yeah,
basically, I mean, I think a good way to kind of do that too is, hey, let's level set here. We started a podcast for these reasons, and then you lay out the
right.
goal, and then you go, okay, since we launched the podcast, we're measuring towards those goals. Has anything
Mhm.
changed? Right? Do you feel like
Great
these goals
question.
still make sense?
I
Right?
love that.
And then they start
Yes.
getting into that, and they go, well, yeah, that's working, but I think we need to expand. And then you can go, okay, well, um, what basically, I don't know, this is this is where
There
I
you
would
go.
stumble at that point, but it's like where getting from that point going, well, if we're going to now set a new set of goals, because YouTube is a totally different platform, how you
Yeah,
measure it is different, and in my experience, you really need a different kind of content to be successful on LinkedIn, which
mhm,
usually means we're going to need to edit the videos differently and kind of take a different approach, right? So, would it make sense for us to reevaluate our goals that we set out to do this originally, or do these ones really still make sense?
mhm.
And basically just kind of bring them back to that higher
Yeah.
level vision. Because otherwise, what happens when you're talking to high level people, executives or clients, is they're thinking big picture a lot of times, but then when they get really tactical in the weeds, it's usually because they heard a podcast or they, saw
Yep.
a video or whatever, and now they're coming back trying to dictate tactics, which is really your job to help them figure out what those are. So then
Mhm.
it's pulling them back to that higher level and kind of resetting on, hey, are we still aligned on this? And if we are, then you can kind of go from there.
Yeah. So what I like to think is that we're a lot of people will be like, "Oh God, that sounds like quite high stakes when you start challenging your client or pushing back on your client." But the whole idea is to make sure that, like, it's kind of what you said, right? I could just say yes to them putting the videos on YouTube, and then next month it's like, well, why aren't our YouTube videos getting any views? And you're like, well, because the videos that you've produced aren't really going to work on YouTube for these reasons. And they're like, well, why didn't you tell me that? And it's like, right, okay, now it's my problem. Now it's me that's like, it's now becoming a problem for me. So it's like, all we're doing is we're making sure that the theme is that we're not saying yes right away until we're very clear on exactly why we're doing what we're doing, what we want to achieve, and
Yep.
that there's a real plan there, right? We're not doing anything until that scope. That it's just like any request needs scoping, right? Whether it's going to be in scope or out of scope, we can talk about that at the end, but we have to scope it first before we can make any decisions there. And that's all we're doing. It's just making sure that we know exactly what it is, what their expectations are. And then at some point, I think this is potentially a little more advanced for account managers, is stepping into a place where they have insight and opinion and expert recommendation as well. So it's kind of
Mm.
what you were saying, Joseph, which is like, look, we've done this with clients before. This is how it works, right? YouTube is not LinkedIn for these reasons. Your videos that currently have will not work on YouTube for these reasons. Therefore, we would need to do this work to make it work. Okay, just so you understand what type of work's going into this. It isn't just a case of repurposing the videos. Does that still feel like something that you want to do? So,
Well, and yeah,
in other
with that,
words,
like another,
you have to have, sorry, this
yeah.
final point, which is, in order to be good at that, you really need to know these things, right? There's some insight that you have from your experience that you can use to help clients make better decisions.
And from an agency perspective, you're going to learn that quickly because you're working with a lot of different clients, right? So
Hope
that is a
so.
great place. Like if you're only working in-house somewhere, you're not going to get you're going to get depth of experience, but you're not necessarily going to get the
Yeah.
breadth of experience to see, hey, this works across the board. And I like what you're saying there, because you can also go back to other goals bring up other things that have come in the conversation. So, man, I love YouTube. I love creating videos for YouTube. It's so fun. And what I found over time is that YouTube takes a different level of effort and input, right? And so when we originally started, and we're going back to our initial conversations, we really talked about the importance of keeping this simple and really being as little time burden on you as possible. Is that still really what you want to do? Or are you getting more excited about content and you want to put a lot more hours in every week into creating it?
Yeah.
But then now we're flipping it, right? And it's not just the goals, but like showing them, look, this is going to take way more investment on you. And you told me that's not what you wanted to do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, this is good. This is good that we're going back and forth on this, because another way to do it is, I think you probably better state it than me, which is that if you do know what the client's goals are for the project that we're working on, you could state them like what you did. And it's like, hey, look, I want to check in, right? Before we make any decisions here, let's check in. The reason we started this project in the first place was so we could do X, Y, Z. Do those goals still feel like what we want to achieve? Yes. Great. Well, let's talk about how YouTube fits in with these goals, or if it doesn't, perhaps, right? So again, you can state, you don't have to always, if you know the answers, in other words, what I'm saying is, if you know the answers to some of these things, you can just state them as they are. But yeah, I think we're just trying to get, I say just, we're forcing clarity, getting the client to make better decisions, because it's not just a case of like the client coming to their agency and saying, oh, you can do all of that. I don't need to worry. I'm just going to give it to you and you can do it. Yeah. And it's like, well, actually, not really. We still want to make sure that we're doing high impact work. In fact, 2 out of 10 ideas that you have will only be, those will be the ones that are actually worth doing. The other 8 are probably not worth doing, right? So we're not going to do everything. We're actually going to do the things that are going to have the highest impact for your organization. The good thing about this, I need to say this because it's been on my mind since we started talking about this, is that this is a great example, Joseph, of a conversation that's happening in the middle of a relationship that should have been talked about at the beginning, right? So when I work with my clients, which is their account managers or coaches and consultants, we talk about like the 12 success conversations that need to happen with clients at the beginning. And one of them is, what happens when you bring me a new idea in the middle of a project? Here's exactly how we qualify a new idea. Here's what we'll do if something's out of scope, right? You've paid for this. This is like, so you've paid, this is what you get when you work with us. Now, of course, new things are going to come up. There's going to be fires, going to be emergencies. There's going to be new ideas. Here's the process for qualifying them. And we'll have 3, we might say something like, well, there's 3 things we'll do. We'll either decide that it's not important and we'll defer it to another project sprint. We'll take something off the board and put this on, or we'll create a separate project with a separate contract for the thing that we want to do. Okay, that's what we do. But when you bring a new idea, just be aware that what we'll do is we sit and we qualify that idea first, or we do a scope of work for it, whatever it might be, whatever language you want to use. But my point is that is a conversation that you and I will have, and I will get your verbal agreement on at the beginning of a relationship, and many other conversations that we need to have at the beginning of a relationship to make sure that we get off on the right foot and our relationship is the right, I call it just setting the conditions for success, that this relationship is set to be successful. And a lot of times in agencies, it's basically just like, I hope this will work out, right? And there's not a deliberate attempt to be like, one of the most common ones, I'll share this with you since it's right there, is almost all companies that are hiring a marketing agency, I don't know what the percentage is, but let's just say it's like half, at least half, is like they've worked with an agency before.
Yep.
And it sucked. Yep. And for the rest of them, because they're now trying to get to a new agency, something didn't go well, right? Or there's a reason why they're shifting agencies. For everybody else, they've heard a story from somebody else about an agency that sucked, right? It was too much money. We didn't get enough ROI. They never gave it, whatever. Insert complaint, right? And so one of the conversations I get my clients through when they're bringing somebody on into an agency for the first time is, it's basically the theme of the conversation is, have you ever hired an agency before? Have you ever worked with an agency before? So let's say the answer is yes. You say, well, that's great. Now tell me what went well. Give me like 3 key specific things that went really well in those previous relationships. And hear specifically what you feel like didn't go well. And then the conversation is, what do we need to do to make sure that doesn't happen here?
I love that.
Or it could be, if you ever hired an agency before, they say no. And you say, what do you think a great relationship should look like with your partner? And so what we're doing is the client's actually getting the chance to define what good looks like. And there's a really good chance, based on my experience, there's a really good chance that they'll say everything that you want them to say,
Yeah.
right? And then you can also say something like, that's our commitment to you. Now, what are you bringing to this relationship? What do you need to individually bring to make sure this is successful too? And so they're doing all this talking. They're discovering what they want this relationship to look like, and it becomes a partnership. So that's just one or two of like maybe a dozen conversations that need to happen at the very beginning. But the real question that anybody that's watching this, you need to ask yourself are, there's maybe 2 or 3 questions. There are, what are the problems, worries, fears, concerns, anxieties that clients have when they're hiring an agency for the first time? How do we address them right out of the gate so that they're disarmed and ready to take your lead? When you think about a client 12, 18 months into the relationship, what problems, what known, predictable problems come up that cause friction, frustration, slow down? Can you think about how you bring them to the day one and have
I
a
love that.
conversation about them, right? So it's like you bring it all to the front. This is called the vanguard, right? To proactively prevent predictable problems. It's the practice of seeing down that path like you've got a flashlight and you can see down the dark path. You can see the potholes. You can see the corners. You can see all the obstacles. And you're basically saying, let's talk about all this stuff up front and let's get an agreement on making sure that this stuff doesn't happen for us. I was working with an agency recently and I said to them, look, what would you say are like the most common problems for failure with your clients? And they came up with 8 things. And they said, oh, okay, good. I said, could that be your whole onboarding conversation? Pretty much, right? There are 8 reasons why you won't succeed. Let's talk about each one and make sure they won't be true for you, right? It's like we just go through them and we're like getting agreements with them. And they're getting excited now because they can see that they can be successful here and so on and so forth. And the whole idea is to construct your onboarding. And I'm not talking about admin like Google accounts and ad accounts. That's all stuff that needs to happen. But the big piece that's often missing is, have we had the conversations to establish like a world-class transformative relationship where we're actually going to do our best work together? And often the answer is no.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, we could spend so much time. What you just talked about, it's like a whole nother, could be a whole nother episode.
A day of podcasts.
Yeah, we might need to do another one on that topic, because if you get things set and the expectations are right up front, it's like you're saying, it sets the tone, right? And this makes me think of a show I recently watched, a podcast that a friend of mine did, and he talked about doing this when you hire an employee. And he's basically like, look, I go sit down and I have a conversation with every new person I hire. And I really liked how he did this, and I think it ties really well into what you're talking about here. And he goes, you come up with these characters that are right for your company culture and kind of make sense with your industry. And so, it could be movie characters or something that's people are going to visualize, right? And so you might go, hey, have you ever worked with a time vampire before?
Right.
And then the person's like, either going to be like, yeah, exactly. Or, you might dig a little bit deeper and you're like, yeah, you know how it feels when somebody, they just seem to put time on your calendar when they haven't figured anything out, or they're always looking to book meetings and just talk to you, and they don't really have a point. And so you're getting them to now visualize what this person looks like that is a negative tendency in your company culture that you have to deal with, right? So then you get them to say that, and you go, yeah, okay, company vampires. Well, here's how we think about vampires here. And if you ever see me operating that way, then here's how you call that out if I'm doing that to you. And then we're going to do the same thing with you. If you're ever leaning into that vampire territory, we kill time sucking vampires around here. So here's what that's going to look like. And now you've set that expectation for that specific company culture that you want. And then when they do that thing in the future, you now go, hey, remember that conversation we had about vampires? Like, we're going to kill some vampires today.
It's
and now
really
you've already said that.
Yeah, the key thing there, I think there's a couple of key things to point out here, I think, is that what's the difference between, like, imagine you onboarded as an employee, Joseph, and I just said, right, Joseph, we've got 10 rules around here. Rule 1, rule 2, rule 3, rule 4, rule 10. Got it? Got it. Right. And then I come back. you've forgotten them. You've forgotten rules, all the first 5 rules when you get to rule 10, right? You're
Absolutely.
not remembering any of that. And so the whole idea, this is what we're talking about with question first. There's there's actually 4 key pillars to world-class breakthrough transformative communication. The vanguard, which we've talked about, right? Which is to proactively prevent predictable problems, get ahead of them, and
Yep.
disarm, right? So that people don't feel anxious or worried or concerned. They're ready to take your lead, right? That's the vanguard principle. Or the question first, right? Which is to use questions to see the world as a question, but to use questions to get to self-discovery, which is what you're talking about, right? Which is, how do I get them to tell me what a time vampire is, and then get them to tell me what that looks like and how we handle it and how we make sure it doesn't happen to us, or we're not doing it to other people, right? Far
Yep.
more like we're now bought in, right? But the other pillar is the law of 3, which is it's the practice of asking, going beyond the third question, because that's where the truth is. That's where the breakthrough is, right? So we have to
Mm.
use vanguard, question first, and law of 3 to really help us get people talking so that we can understand them and that they can even understand themselves, right? That's where we get these breakthroughs. You ever had
Yep.
that when you're talking to someone and you go, oh, you know what? Stop there, Joseph. I know exactly what to do. You never gave them the answer. You just talked them through it and they figured it out for themselves, right? And
Yep.
we need, in order to do this really well, we need one more pillar, which is yes and, right? And yes and comes from the world of improv, which is this idea that we don't get stuck in the negative energy. We don't say, I'm right, and I start debating with you and arguing with you. My job with the yes and energy is to create momentum in the conversation, to build on it, not break it, right?
Yep.
So we've got this idea of build, not break. We've got this idea to get to core, ask more. We've got this idea of ask, don't tell. And we've got this idea of proactively preventing predictable problems. And we take those 4 pillars together, and what we get is this transformative way of communicating with our peers, with our clients, with our, even managing up. Like, imagine using all of this to like manage your boss, even,
Yep.
right? But also have great conversations with your wife, with your husband, with your kids. It can change your life, really can. But those are the
Yeah, I
4
love that.
pillars that we're really talking around here today.
Yeah, and that vanguard piece is it's huge because if that vanguard includes setting the expectation for what good looks like,
Yep.
then that gives you the opportunity at any point. And this is with managing up also, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're an account manager and you're working with somebody, you really need to understand what's the business outcome that their bosses are looking for out of this, and you can help them
Right.
by asking the right questions. Let's go back to the I work a lot on launching podcasts and doing that, so it's relevant to me, right? But if we're launching a podcast and I'm just talking to the marketing manager on the other side, and they get
Sure.
buy-in, and they have, we're going to work together, whatever. I would be doing them a disservice if I'm going to measure the way that they want to measure. I need to be measuring in the way that they're going to be able to take to their boss, and their boss is going to go, this was worth doing it, right? So I need to be asking
Yeah.
the questions of like, what are the revenue goals you guys are looking to achieve?
Yeah.
If what are some of your pillar in the last time you had an all hands meeting with your team? What were the key pillars that your CEO was saying? Hey, these are the main things we're driving towards this quarter or
Yeah.
this year, and we're going to start to build on those. And we go, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, we're going to measure on impressions or whatever, sure, all that kind of stuff, right? But what if we added these other things in that we could measure that will tie back to
Yep.
these overarching company goals, right? And that's in a way managing up to that person, right? And now then when they go to their boss, they're going to be championing what we're doing in the right language so that we
Yeah.
don't get fired
Yep.
when things are actually going the right way just because the
Mm-hmm.
other person was using the wrong measurement.
100%. What you're talking about here is managing an aloof CEO, for example. That's what we call it. So the whole idea is like understanding, like, so for a question that some people might be afraid to ask is, you're meeting with your CEO in 6 months' time and they're pulling the plug on this project. Why? What's gone
Yeah.
wrong? What hasn't happened that they've pulled this project, right? So like that's a
Yep.
great, it's a very direct question, but it ultimately gets the answer of what we're looking for. So what do we need to do to make sure that those things don't happen for us here? What do you think the one number your CEO is mostly interested in when it comes to this project? How are you going to make sure that they know that? How are you going to make sure that they get that? How are you going to make sure that who's going to be responsible for reporting to the CEO? They don't need to know everything. They need to know these things. So you're absolutely right. I'm just adding to what you're saying here is like, we're getting ahead of problems before they become problems. That's Vanguard. And you're thinking many, many steps ahead, and even many layers, right? So through the market manager to the CMO to the CEO, it's like this, how do we set this project up for success?
Yeah. And we've already gone for 40 minutes here, so I'm gonna wrap us up because
quick.
This could be like a 3-hour conversation.
Oh, mate, I've got tons of stuff
to be a sit down.
We're just getting started.
Joe
We're just getting warmed up here.
Yeah, there's so much stuff we could cover because each thing is unraveling a whole new layer of
layers.
Yeah, I want to dig into because it's super valuable. And then we didn't even get into the other piece I wanted to get into, which is like authority and building authority and how to do that, which I know some of this helps you do that,
it's
right?
all linked here, yes. Foundational.
We'll probably need to have some more conversations and maybe do a longer version
do a part
where we
two maybe or something. Yeah.
Because this is super valuable. And what I really love about what you shared, just to kind of put a cap on it here, is what you're talking about applies to so many different roles. It's basically like if you have any kind of client facing roles, almost every single thing you said applies. So if you're in sales, having that upfront Vanguard conversation is important, and even bringing it up like, hey, here's some of the main reasons why we see this kind of engagement fail. And we'd much rather address these things up front and get on the same page about that and make sure we're mitigating that. And then you could lay those out. And then you could even go like, which one of those do you think is most likely to happen if we were to work together? And they go, oh, well, we're so busy. It's this piece, right? And now you go, okay, cool. Well, we don't want to end up selling you something that's not going to be able to be fulfilled. So do you see that as being something that we could work through together? Or is that going to be like, there's just no way we could resolve that, right? And now you're getting that buy-in up front and you're creating that buy-in from sales. And then you do the same thing with your account managers when you're onboarding, and then the people who are interfacing with the client, your strategists, they're doing a lot of the same things. Mm-hmm. And if you can connect all of that messaging and language together from beginning to end, then the client doesn't ever feel like they were handed from sales to the account manager to the delivery, and so I love if you're able to really set that up all the way.
You've really caught the vision there. Yeah, 100%. I mean, you got to remember that it's not a Vanguard if you're dealing with it in the moment. That's like you're dealing with a problem now. And the whole idea is, could I have predicted that this problem would have come up? And if the answer is yes, which it often is, you need to do something about it to prevent it from happening. Like you need to get into that Vanguard space. And it's about, the last thing we want is, what we're trying to avoid here is that the client is bringing us problems that we know that we could have prevented.
Yeah.
Right. And if we can do that up front, it's going to save everybody a ton of time and a ton of energy. Right. But also it just reduces friction in the client journey as well. Like their client experience will improve because we've removed the friction from it. And so I think it's all upside, right? It's all upside because another upside would be that they decide not to work with you because of it. That's good. That's good for everybody.
Good.
So it's like
good.
all upside. A lot of people stay away from it, and then they're sort of dealing with these problems, these fires every day. And the whole idea is like, from now on, we're just going to get ahead of all these problems so that they don't come up. And it's not that we can remove every single problem or predict everything, but for all the things that you do know, it's our responsibility to have those conversations up front.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's a win-win, right? Because you're making sure that your team isn't getting screwed, but you're also really keeping the client in mind and going, hey, if I do what the client's saying, we're not actually going to be able to deliver what we promised that we were going to deliver, right? And so you're protecting your team and your time and all of that, but you're also really protecting and putting guardrails on the client. Anyway, we keep going back and forth all day. This is super good. We'll have to do it again. But Chris, thanks so much for joining me today to dig into this. It's really super valuable, very practical, and having been in quite a few roles that benefit from that, I definitely have some takeaways, especially the Vanguard piece is huge. It's going to help me.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, Joseph. Yeah, thanks for asking all the great questions and getting me to talk lots. I appreciate it.
Super fun, man. Awesome.
Thanks.
Well,
cheers.
If you're tuning in, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next live.
See you guys.